All right. Well, good morning, Radiant. I told myself I wasn't, but yet here I am. You ever had that a song stuck in your mind? Got to thank my man Joe for putting a song in my mind this morning as he walked in the door, because he asked me this question: have you seen the VeggieTales version of Daniel chapter 3? And so, for you parents out there that have ever showed VeggieTales to your kids, you know that is a song that sometimes is hard to get out of your mind. So if I chase a rabbit this morning, that's why. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're living in the most powerful empire in the world. And you wake up one morning, and as we often do, you drink a cup of coffee. You maybe read the paper, catch up on the news, catch up definitely on your social media. And suddenly you get word that your government has sent orders across the entire kingdom. And you're required to show up on a specific day at a specific location. Every official in the kingdom is going to be there. Every level of government is going to be represented. 0 exceptions given. And when you arrive, that's when you see it. You see this massive, if you can picture this, a 90-foot statue, 9 feet wide, made of gold, which means that as you're approaching this statue, you can see it for miles away because it's shining brightly in the Babylonian sunshine. And before you even have a chance to process everything that's happening, you hear this announcement that's made. In just a moment, the music's going to start. That's when everyone is going to fall down and worship this massive image. Not if you feel like it. Not only if it aligns with your personal beliefs or your political beliefs or your religious beliefs, but you're required to immediately fall down. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to be executed and thrown into this burning, fiery furnace that VeggieTales sings about. There I did. I chased a rabbit. Which just so happens, because it was used as a kiln, was probably about 1,500 degrees. Pretty hot. And then it becomes real, because that's when you hear the music start playing. Everybody around you, every province across the greatest empire in the ancient world, everyone falls down on their knees and they worship this image. Everybody except for 3 young men. That's our text this morning in Daniel chapter 3. And this chapter is going to force us to ask a question that we can't avoid. And here's the question. When the world around you demands that you bow, what do you do? Here's where we're going this morning. 3 things we're going to see from our passage. Number 1, the demand. Every empire builds statues, including ours here in the United States. Number 2, the confession. True faith doesn't negotiate. And number 3, the furnace. We're going to notice that God doesn't keep His people out of the fire. He does something a little bit different. He goes in after them. So let's pick it up in Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, and the treasurers, the justices, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And here we go again. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors. We're going to see a lot of lists in our passage this morning. The counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear," here's another list, "the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, if you remember from our passage last week when we ended in Daniel chapter 2, the king was bowing down before Daniel and acknowledging the greatness of Daniel's God, that he was superior than all the gods. This is what he said. He said, he is God of God and Lord of kings. That was just one chapter ago. So what happened between these two chapters? Well, we don't really know what happened between the two chapters, and we don't even really know how much time has elapsed. It was at least long enough to build this massive statue, which appears to have been a significant project. But here's what we do know. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream back in Daniel chapter 2, and God gave Daniel the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar and his empire were represented as the head of gold. And that was followed by silver, which was then followed by bronze and iron, and then lastly, iron mixed with clay. And at some point, the statue was going to be completely destroyed, if you remember, by a stone cut out of a mountain without hands, meaning that God's kingdom was going to come and crush everything. So what does Nebuchadnezzar do with that information? Well, he builds a statue, but now the entire thing's made of gold. Not just the head. The whole thing is made of gold. Rather than accepting the dream's message that his rule and reign were going to be temporary, he decides to build a statue that rejected and defied the entire dream and the interpretation that he just received. Now we also don't know what the image really was, because the text doesn't tell us. It could have been of Nebuchadnezzar himself. It could have also been one of the many Babylonian gods like Marduk. The point isn't really who is on the statue. The point is that Nebuchadnezzar is the one that made it, and he's also the one who's demanding that everybody bow down to it. In the ancient world, the religious and political systems were often fused together, meaning that bowing down before the king wasn't just a religious act. It was also a test of your political loyalty to the king. And ancient kings oftentimes claimed divine status, meaning that they were seen as the bridge between the gods up there and the people down here. Meaning that bowing before the statue was submitting to the king's claim that he was the one that had ultimate authority and ultimate control over your life. And notice the scale of what's happening here. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just invite a few of his closest friends. He invites everybody. The entire government is here. All the satraps and prefects and governors and counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, everybody's here. This is a mandatory event because everybody was required to attend. And the expectation was that whenever you hear the music, there's only one acceptable response, and that's for you to bow down immediately, which means you don't have time to check with your conscience. There's not a grace period that's given. You don't get to opt out of this, because whenever the music starts, you're supposed to fall down and worship immediately. And that's exactly what happened, except for three guys. And that's where we meet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Let's continue in verses 8 to 15. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall bow down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? If you remember back in chapter 1, these were the same 3 young men who chose not to defile themselves with the king's food. Aaron preached on that. And chapter 2 ended with them being promoted to positions of authority. We saw that last week. Which means that their refusal to bow down and worship was something that would have immediately been noticed by people. It's something they couldn't hide. And that's just what happened. Because as we see, certain Chaldeans came forward and they made an accusation. And notice how they worded this accusation. They said to the king, these men have, they don't say that these men have offended your gods. They tell the king, these men pay no attention to you, O king. They're disrespecting you, king. You deserve better than that. They don't address their religious differences. They address their political insubordination. Meaning that these are some pretty savvy guys and they knew exactly what buttons to push with King Nebuchadnezzar. And then the king, he drags these guys out in front of everybody to make an example out of them. And he gives them one more chance. One more opportunity to bow down when the music plays. And I love this because it was almost like he takes a little dagger and he sticks it in a little bit to add more insult to injury with this rhetorical question in verse 15. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Now that's not an honest question from the king. That's really contempt. That's an insult that's wrapped up in a rhetorical question. Because in King Nebuchadnezzar's mind, the answer is nobody. There is no such God. There is no deity that's going to be able to rescue you guys out of my hand. And practically speaking, the king had every reason to believe that. Back in Daniel 1, he conquered Jerusalem already. He took all of the sacred vessels out of the temple and he put them in the house of his own God. So in his mind, he's gone head to head with the God of Israel and he's won. Or so he thought. Because he's got all the trophies of these sacred vessels to prove it. So from the king's perspective, it's not even a close call. He's already beaten this God once. That's why he can arrogantly ask, who's the God who's going to deliver you out of my hands? And here's their answer in verses 16 to 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. What an incredible response here. Notice what they told the king first. They say, we have no need to answer to you. Now again, keep in mind, these are teenage boys. And it almost sounds at first blush that this is kind of rude, or maybe some teenage bravado and arrogance. But really, I think this is what deep-seated conviction sounds like. They know that they're facing the furnace. They know the death penalty is right around the corner. But the question of who they're going to serve has already been settled in their mind. It was decided before they woke up that morning. It was decided before the king made the proclamation. And it was decided before the music even started playing. Meaning that this crisis isn't creating their conviction. This crisis is revealing their conviction. Big difference. Most of us know what it's like to be in a situation where we had to make a split-second decision and answer something really fast. Maybe it was a challenge from a coworker or a question from a friend. Maybe it was a moment where somebody put you on the spot about what you actually believe and why you believe it. Well, how do you respond in that moment? Well, I think it all depends on how you answer this question. Was your conviction already settled before that moment even came? For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it was. They didn't call a timeout so they could think about it. They're not having a huddle off to the side while Nebuchadnezzar's enraged so that they can discuss amongst themselves what they believe and why they believe it. All they're doing is just announcing something that was already settled in their heart and their mind. And it was settled before this moment even arrived. Notice their confidence in verse 17. Our God whom we serve is able. Not that our God might, or not that He could, but our God is able. And it's remarkable, even in exile, they still believed God had the power, that He was sovereign, that He could step in and rescue and deliver them. Also notice the reference to their personal relationship with God. They don't just say God. They say our God, the one whom we serve. They're talking about a personal relationship with God, meaning this isn't a desperate appeal to some deity that they hope exists and is going to be able to rescue them. This is what it looks like to already have been in a relationship with God, to have already spent time with Him and served Him in the daily rhythms and routines of life. Meaning that these guys can make a claim about His character because they've already come to know and experience that in their personal relationship with Him. Our confidence in God in the middle of a crisis grows out of coming to know and experience His love and faithfulness before the crisis. Let me repeat that. Our confidence in God in the middle of a crisis grows out of coming to know and experience His love and faithfulness before the crisis. Look at what they say in verse 18. They say, but if not. But if not. They're not saying that God can't deliver them, because they just said that, hey, we know that He can. And they're not saying that God won't deliver them. But they are saying that even if He doesn't, even if God chooses not to, even if we've got to walk into that furnace and we never walk back out, we're still not going to compromise. We're still not going to bow down. I think that's a powerful statement to make, especially considering the cost, considering what these guys were being threatened with. Notice that their obedience, their boldness, their faithfulness wasn't conditional on being rescued. God isn't a vending machine that we put our faith into and out pops something that we want, like a candy bar or a bag of chips. We don't worship because we think we're going to get something out of it. We worship because God alone is worthy, even if He doesn't rescue us out of our situation. A faith that only holds firm when God comes through the way that you want isn't really genuine faith. That's faith in the gifts of God or the blessings from God, but completely missing the God behind those gifts and blessings. That's just a transactional relationship where you're only loyal when God comes through in the way that you want or expect. But what happens when He doesn't? Well, that's when you begin to renegotiate the terms of the relationship. Or you abandon the faith altogether. What these young men were expressing, I think, is the highest form of trust. Because they're saying that God was worthy of being worshiped and obeyed, regardless of whether or not He chooses to rescue us out of this situation. In their mind, His worth wasn't determined by their situation, because He's God. And they were going to serve Him whether or not the situation ended the way that they wanted. But if God. Those are the kind of words that reveal volumes about the authenticity of your faith. And that brings us to our third point, verses 19 to 23. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. So how did Uncle Nebi take their answer? Well, not too well. Because he explodes. He explodes with violent rage, so much so that the text tells us his face was distorted. He's throwing a fit. He's filled with so much rage that he orders the furnace to be heated up 7 times more than normal. Now, they didn't have temperature gauges back then, so this is not a precise reading. Really, this is figurative language for him saying, hey, crank that baby up as far as it goes. Like he is angry. He is enraged. And that furnace was so hot that the soldiers who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the furnace, they died just from the heat, from the flames. They weren't even thrown into the fire. They were just standing on the outside. Which means that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were bound and thrown into the furnace, they were facing certain death. So hit pause on that for a second. Let me ask, where's God in all of this? I mean, these guys have been faithful. They didn't compromise. They stood firm on their conviction, regardless of the cost. They refused to bow down and worship a pagan king. So where is God in all of this? Well, hold that thought for a moment, because something captures the king's attention. Verses 24 to 25. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire. They are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. So keep in mind that Nebuchadnezzar is a pagan king here. So when he says something like a son of the gods, he's using the language of his polytheistic worldview. What he saw was something that was clearly supernatural and clearly something that shouldn't be in the middle of a burning furnace. Down in verse 28, we'll see here in just a moment, he calls this 4th man his angel. A word that meant a divine messenger or a divine representative. And we see that kind of language all throughout the Bible. The angel of the Lord appeared to Abraham in Genesis 18. The angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in the burning bush in Exodus 3. The angel of the Lord also appeared to Gideon in Judges 6. To Joshua in Joshua 5. To Elijah in 2 Kings 1. And it's all over the place. And in almost every case, what we see is a divine figure showing up in a moment of extreme crisis. And although we can't be entirely sure in this passage here because scholars disagree, I think a strong case can be made that this 4th man in Daniel 3 is none other than the pre-incarnate Son of God, Jesus, making his presence known more than 500 years before he'd be born in a manger in Bethlehem. But whoever this figure is, the point that I want you to see is that God didn't step in and keep Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the furnace. Instead, he went in, right there with them. He's walking around, which means he wasn't watching from a safe distance. He was walking in the midst of the fire with them, and that shouldn't surprise us. The prophet Isaiah, who is writing to the same community of people who were in exile in Babylon, the same community that Daniel and his 3 friends were part of, this is what he said. Isaiah 43, verse 2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. Notice that Isaiah didn't say, if you walk through fire. He said, when you experience these things. God wasn't promising his people that they'd avoid the fire. What he was doing was promising that he was going to be there with them in the midst of the fire, right there in the thick of it with them, with his people. And I think this is one of the most incredible moments and incredible truths in the entire book of Daniel. God doesn't always rescue his people before the fire starts, but he's promised to be present with them in the middle of the fire. And I think that's what King David said in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. He's saying the same thing. And some of you feel like you're in the middle of a furnace right now. You didn't get that rescue that you prayed for, that thing that you asked God to prevent from happening in your life, and he didn't. And you've been trying to figure out, man, where is God in all of this? Let me just encourage you. He's right there with you. He's not standing outside. He's not watching from a safe distance. He's right there with you. And he's promised never to leave, never to forsake you, which means that he's closer than you realize. Notice how the king reacts when he sees this in verses 26 and 27. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Well, I mean, obviously the king is blown away by this. That's not exactly something that you see on a daily basis. And so he immediately calls them out. And you can imagine just everybody being in awe of what they are witnessing. And that's when all the officials gather around. They begin checking these guys out. Not a single hair was singed. None of their clothing was burned up. There was no smell of smoke. And if you've been around a fire, man, if you are around a fire long enough, you walk away smelling like smoke. None of that was here. These guys came out completely unscathed. And here's the detail that I've been thinking about all week long. This passage goes out of its way to tell us what they were wearing, and that all of it came out completely undamaged. Everything except one thing. Notice that their bonds were burned up, completely gone. They went into the furnace as bound men on their way to certain death, and they came out free. The fire destroyed the very thing that was restraining them and left everything else untouched. Meaning that the instruments of their execution became the very thing that set them free. Notice how the king responds in verses 28 to 30. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So the king, he responds by not only promoting these guys, but once again, he's blessing the one true God. Imagine the irony here. Just a few minutes ago, the king demanded that everybody fall down and worship the golden image. And now that same king was acknowledging the supremacy of the one true God. He said, there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. No other God. That might sound like genuine conversion, that suddenly King Nebuchadnezzar became monotheistic. But as we're going to see in chapter 4, that's not the case. Nebuchadnezzar needed more time. What he's doing by making that comment is updating his rankings. Kind of like fantasy football. What happens when your player has a great game over the weekend? Well, you earn points and your team moves up in the rankings. That's more or less what's happening here. Nebuchadnezzar is moving the God of Israel to the top of his pantheon. There's no doubt he's been impressed by what he's seen, even grateful. But he's not fully submitted. He hasn't repented. As we saw last week, you can be in awe and yet still remain unrepentant. You can be in wonder. That's not the same as surrender. This is no different. Being impressed isn't the same as being converted. Being moved by God isn't the same as following God. Admiring God isn't the same as worshiping God. Acknowledging that He's the most powerful isn't the same thing as surrendering your life to Him as the ultimate authority. So let me ask, is there a version of Nebuchadnezzar's response in your own life where you're impressed by what God can do? Maybe you've even been moved by what you've seen God do in your life or maybe even the lives of others. Perhaps you can even admit to yourself that no one's more powerful than this God. Perhaps you've even experienced something so profound in your life that you'd call it miraculous, but you still haven't fully surrendered to Him. You still aren't truly worshiping Him. Still haven't genuinely repented before Him. There were three things to see in Daniel 3. First, every empire builds a statue and demands that you bow to something other than God. That was true in Babylon 2,500 years ago, and it's just as true for us today, here in Juneau in 2026. Second, there were three men that had already settled their faith before the music had even begun playing. And third was that God didn't prevent the fire, and He didn't rescue them before the fire. Instead, what we see is that our great God was in the middle of the fire with them, with the very men who trusted Him, regardless of the cost. But there's also a gospel connection that I want you to see. The fourth man walking into that furnace so that his people wouldn't be alone in the worst moment of their lives. And then more than 500 years later, the Son of God walked into a fire that was infinitely worse. It was the wrath and judgment of God. Except this time He would do it alone. Nobody was beside Him. He was completely forsaken so that everyone who would trust in Him would never be forsaken. He entered the furnace of God's wrath so that the bonds of our sin could burn and so that His people could walk out completely free. That's the gospel thread in Daniel 3. The but if not of those three young men finds its ultimate answer, as we saw in the book of Ephesians, in the but God of the cross. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. When the music starts playing, and at some point in your life it will, has your answer already been decided? And remember this. Our confidence in God in the middle of a crisis grows out of coming to know and experience His love and faithfulness before the crisis. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I continue to just be amazed at the faithfulness, the courage, the boldness of these teenage boys in the book of Daniel. These three young men who would stand before the most powerful man on earth and refuse to compromise. Lord, what a great encouragement that is to see, and what a great challenge that is, Lord. I pray that You would stir within us and help us to be able to see clearly, Lord, the areas of compromise in our own lives where we've bowed and followed other things besides Jesus, where we've looked for rescue outside of Jesus, what Tim Keller would call functional idols. Lord, thank You for Your word. Thank You for the encouragement and challenge of Your word. I pray that You would strengthen us and give us the grace so that we could be more faithful to you, Lord. And we ask this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.